my god. Hi everyone! Welcome to episode 55 of the So Not Scary series. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about something very, very important. And it's about why your mini sewing machine is not stitching properly, or why your mini sewing machine is not sewing properly. I stumbled upon this by accident last weekend. And as you know, we ran a poll on the channel, and 70% of you voted that you guys want to learn sewing garments just as much as I do. So this weekend I was actually sitting down and practicing how to sew a dress for my daughter, and it was the most frustrating experience of my life. I tried sewing on my mini sewing machine. It did not work. The thread kept breaking, the machine kept jamming, skipping stitches. No matter what I did, nothing would work. I moved on to my big sewing machine, which is my brother LS14 sewing machine that you've seen in this video as well. Thread kept breaking. I don't know, it seemed like I'm repelling technology, and even the basic things like sewing a straight stitch is not happening. So I went to bed in tears Saturday night. I literally went to bed in tears. Yesterday, I calmed down a bit and I sat down to do some research. And this is what I discovered. So I'm gonna backtrack a bit and show you exactly what's going on. So here in front of you is my kpcb Tech mini sewing machine. This is the sewing machine that I use in pretty much all of my videos, and I bought it in 2019, I believe October, sometime thereabouts, and up until this weekend this machine has worked perfectly for me. Okay, now here in front of you, you will see 3 spools of green thread. Okay, in front of those reels of thread you will see a piece of fabric which has been folded over in half. Okay, it's 2 layers of a densely woven cotton. So what we're now going to do is use each one of those threads to sew a straight stitch down each one of these 3 columns. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've threaded my mini sewing machine with the first thread that you saw sitting on the table earlier. Okay, and I'm going to sew a straight stitch down column number 1. Okay, so I'm probably going to start on this side because it's easier. Okay, so the stitches of column number 1 have been done. Okay, and as you can see, there are no skip stitches. Everything is sitting perfectly evenly. And if I flip this over, look at that, perfectly even, beautiful straight stitches. Okay, let's move on to column number 2. Okay, so now the second thread reel is in position, and I'm going to sew along column number 2, which is the second column. Here we go. Okay, so that's the stitch line of column number 2, and again, as you can see, the stitches came through beautifully, perfectly, just like the stitches of column number 1. And now let me flip it over and show you. Do you see? The stitches came through beautifully. There's nothing wrong with them, just like the stitches of column number 1 came through perfectly. Okay, now let's move on to the third thread. Okay, so now I've installed the third thread reel, and we're going to sew a straight line in the third column. Okay, so here's the third column, and as you can see, we started here, and in the beginning it seemed to be fairly okay, but then look what happened here. It has skipped a stitch here. Okay, now it's just one skip stitch. We can give it benefit of the doubt. Okay, and if I flip this over, you can see here as well, for the most part it seemed fine, but it skipped a stitch there. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, well, you might think, it's just a one-off, maybe there's nothing serious, nothing majorly wrong with it. So let's give this one more chance and let's sew another line of stitching. Okay, now let's analyze the third thread reel that we just used. Okay, so on the first line of stitching, it skipped one stitch here. Okay, so we said let's give it one more chance, maybe it's just a one-off. So we started sewing a second line again and immediately skipped a stitch there. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Look, when we turned the corner, it never caught the corner, so that's another skipped stitch. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 skipped stitches in this short distance between this end and this end. Okay, and that's what happened with the third reel of thread. Now this was just an experiment, and it's easy for me to say, oh look, this thread messed up these stitches and there are 12 skipped stitches in this short distance. But what if you were actually sewing a real project like I was sewing last weekend? Okay, if you get these results, it can drive you crazy, because sewing for beginners like us is difficult as it is. It's a tricky business, and when you experience difficulties like these, it can get really annoying. It can really push you and test you in all the wrong ways. Okay, so what's happening? Initially, for number 1, I had used this thread reel, and as you can see, this thread is called Gutermann. I think that's how to pronounce it. I'm not quite sure. And I believe it's a German brand. Okay, this is one of the most expensive threads on the market. When you go out to buy it, it's going to leave a dent in your pocket if you're buying more than a few spools of thread. Okay, but it's one of the best threads out there on the market. Okay, which is why people recommend this thread. Okay, it's expensive, but it's worth it. Let's just put it that way. Now let's move on to the second thread. On top of this thread, you will see it says Coats Moon 120 and some other number, which is probably the shade or the color of the thread. But anyway, this thread is called Coats Moon thread. Okay, now this is one of the cheaper threads, which is still good quality. Okay, now when I first bought my Brother LS14, after a few months of using, my machine started skipping stitches. Okay, and I just did everything I could and nothing would work. So I called up a local sewing machine expert, and he said, before you come all the way to see me, first let me know what thread you're using. And I told him, oh, I'm using one of those unbranded threads that I bought on eBay. And he said, no, you need to use something better quality. And he himself suggested Coats Moon. Okay, when he suggested that over the phone, I bought some spools of Coats and Moon online, and I've never looked back. Okay, can you see how fat that reel is? And this isn't even a brand new reel. This is like a really old reel. I've used it several times now. Okay, and it just keeps going, and it's much cheaper compared to Gutermann. Now what's happening here? What's on the machine? Now this thread reel, which is the one which was giving us all the problems with the skip stitches, actually wasn't bought here where I live. This actually came from Asia. Okay, my mom brought it from me. It was part of a whole big bundle of threads which are sold very cheaply over there. Okay, and people do use them very frequently on big sewing machines. Okay, so what's going on with these threads? To make the point clearer, I've actually laid down samples of each one of those threads. So on the left is number 1, Gutermann, in the middle is number 2, which is Coats Moon, and in the third position here is that nameless Asian thread that I've been using, which was skipping stitches. Okay, and without even going into the technical details of how many strands there are within the thread and all that jazz, you can see that number 1, which is Gutermann, has got a really fine, really tightly knit filament. Okay, which is the reason why it looks so thin and clear and crisp. In the middle is the Coats Moon thread. Okay, and it's not as fine as your Guruman thread, but it's not as fat as thread number 3 either. Okay, it's somewhere in the middle. And in the third position is that brandless Asian thread that I'd been talking about, okay, which I used and which was skipping stitches. Okay, essentially what's happening in our mini sewing machine is that you can only adjust the tension of the top thread. So whatever bobbin you put in the bottom thread, its tension stays the same. If you put a thin thread on top, for example the Guruman, okay, you could tighten the knob, okay, so that the plates clasp it properly and so that the tension is fine. If you're moving towards fuzzier threads, for example thread number 3, okay, you could always loosen the upper thread, okay, to adjust the tension of the top thread. But what happens is that when we do touch the upper tension, the lower bobbin's tension also goes out of sync. Okay, now normally in big sewing machines, when the thread tension is going through such drastic changes of the top thread, you can actually adjust the lower bobbin's thread tension as well using a tiny little screw. But in our mini sewing machine, there is no such lower bobbin screw, so that tension of the lower bobbin stays what it is, while the upper thread tension goes completely haywire when we install really fuzzy threads like the one that you see in position number 3. Okay, now you might be thinking that all that I've just said is a lot of waffle, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reprove my point. So here I've got 3 different threads from the same brands that we just saw. So you've got a Guruman black thread here, you've got a purple coats moon thread here, and that same company, it was called Stitchwell, but the name was almost rubbed off on the original spindle. That's the same company's Stitchwell red thread. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew straight stitches using all 3 threads in the same columns number 1, 2 and 3, and get back to you and show you the results. Okay guys, take a good look one more time. So that's column number 1, as you can see. Okay, that's number 1. That's a black thread I just sewed. Okay, now carefully look at the stitches. Okay, not a single skip stitch. The line is perfectly beautiful. Let's move on to column number 2. So that's number 2 there, you can see. Okay, and now look at the stitch line. Not a single skip stitch, nothing wrong with it, sitting nice and flat. Now here is column number 3, as you can see. That's number 3, and here's the stitch line. Now let's follow it. Here we go, 1 2 3 4, 5th skip stitches. Okay, there. Then again go down, good enough. Look there, another skip stitch. Okay, going down again, here's another one. Okay, we've already counted 3, and then here we go. Look at this, several skip stitches. Okay, and then here again. Okay, this is not acceptable work. Maybe in a large project you can tolerate 1 or 2 skip stitches because then you can go back and manually fix it, but this is not good sewing performance. Okay, and you definitely want to avoid that. Now for some odd reason, because I suppose the camera is running, this thread is not playing up as badly as it was playing up on me over the weekend. Over the weekend I have cried tears after this thread, and I kid you not. Okay, it kept bunching up, it kept jamming the machine. Okay, I literally had to snip away all the thread from underneath the fabric just to get the fabric dislodged from the machine. That's how bad it was. Okay, you definitely don't want yourself to be in a situation when you're sitting down to sew. Okay, now I would like to really think that I did not suffer in vain over the weekend. So I need you guys to have a good takeaway from all this, from this video. Okay, and what's a takeaway here? Well, the first takeaway is that please don't just go out and buy any old nameless, faceless, brandless thread made in China, okay, just because it's cheap. Okay, now I have all these reels of threads which were skipping stitches because I never spent the money to buy them. They were gifted to me. Okay, so if I had spent money on them, I would feel really bad for myself. Okay, but because I haven't spent money on them, it's not as painful. But if you guys go out and you say, oh, I've got a cheap mini sewing machine, I'm gonna go out and buy cheap sewing thread from eBay or from somewhere else, okay, maybe from your local market, and expect it to perform beautifully, you will be setting yourself up for disaster. Because yeah, I'm sure there are good threads out there as well, but there are more bad ones out there, the ones which are unbranded or the ones which you've not heard of, okay? So a takeaway from this, please buy your thread from a reputable shop or of a reputable brand, okay? Now, I'm not saying you must go out and splurge out on the most expensive threads. There are, for example, Gurumans, which are really expensive, okay? I mean, if you're rich, sure, go ahead, buy that. But, you know, for the most part, we are learning to sew not because we want to spend more money, but because we want to save more money in the long term, okay? A good midpoint then becomes, if you are in England, the Coats and Moon thread, okay? I don't know if these guys are available in America or not. By all means, go online, search around for them, or maybe you guys have some different brands of thread, I don't know. But here in England, where I am based, Coats Moon thread is cheap and good quality. You get tons on the reel, okay? Now, I'm not sponsored by these guys. Nobody's paying me money to promote one kind of thread and to put down other kinds of thread, okay? By all means, go ahead, do your own research and find your own kind of thread, okay? But please don't go out and buy any old nameless, faceless thread and expect it to perform beautifully, okay? Because the odds are that it's gonna play up on you at some point and you're going to end up second, third guessing yourself whether you set up your sewing machine correctly or not. Whereas the truth is, you must have done everything by the book, and still, if only you make this mistake of putting in cheap, fuzzy, brandless, nameless thread in your machine, you might just be setting yourself up for disaster, okay? Please don't do that, okay? And this is also one of the reasons why in that mini sewing machine operation checklist, which I've posted online, and I'll post a link down to that list below once more, the first thing on the list is I'm using a strong non-fuzzy thread, okay? Can you see I've not included any brand names on there? And that's because I want you guys to do your research. Maybe you live in a country where you don't have these brands of thread. Maybe you don't have the Gutermans or your Coats and Moon threads, but maybe your local haberdashery shops or maybe tailors in your country can recommend you what brands are good and which ones are not, okay? So do your research, spend a little bit extra and get a good thread, okay? Because you've taken the plunge and you've bought a mini sewing machine, okay? You want this to work. You want to come out on the other side with some good skills which will help you in future, okay? Don't ruin all that investment by just a cheap little reel of thread, okay? I hope you found today's episode valuable, guys, and that you realize how important it is to choose the correct kind of thread for your sewing machine, whether it's a mini sewing machine or whether it's a big sewing machine, okay? Thank you so much for watching. If you think you discovered some new insights through this video which might help another sewist out, by all means, please share this video, help another sewist out, because these are things which aren't openly, very commonly talked about. Most sewists think, oh, people who sew would know this naturally. Well, I didn't. I suffered this weekend. I cried real tears, okay? I don't want you guys to cry those tears, okay? So if you know a sewist out there that you love, pass it on, spread the love, share the knowledge, and I shall see you guys soon. Bye!